Hey, welcome to Ed, a podcast about the teaching life. This is Conversation 96, and I am your host, Shane Lawrence. Ed is a proud member of the Alberta Podcast Network, powered by ATB. And before we get going, a little bit of business here. It's that time of year again. It's time for the Alberta Podcast Network survey. You can head over to albertapodcastnetwork.com/survey to fill it out. That'll help us figure out what you like and make the Alberta Podcast Network the best that it can be for you. And while you're at it, you also get entered into a draw for one of 3 $100 prizes. So just hit pause, head over to albertapodcastnetwork.com/survey, fill it out, and then we'll see you back here. Right on. Today I am joined by Dr. Cathryn van Kessel. Awesome. Well, hi. How are you doing?
I'm well, thanks. How are you?
I am doing really well. I had a great day. I just actually got to reconnect with an old student today and hear her success story. So that was really cool. So, yeah.
That's the best. That's my favorite thing, when you hear from someone that you were part of their lives as a teacher, or actually, well, anyone who's been part of your life. It's great.
Yeah. Yeah. As long as it's not like, you're reading front page news and it's like, oh, that's not so hot.
Also true.
No, it's actually really good. She's a key makeup artist on upcoming Batwoman series. So that's really cool.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. She's got like a super shiny job. I'm like, wow, that's awesome. So,
yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, so how was your day?
It was great. Doing some housework and some yard work, kind of pretending, to at least try to work with my physical body rather than my mind, which I find refreshing.
How often? So what's the ratio? How often do you get to work with your body rather than your mind?
Oh, once every 2 weeks if I'm lucky.
Yeesh.
I would like it to be more, though. Over the summer, it will be more. I'm actually going to take some vacation for once.
Well, are you done now?
Well, I'm done teaching, but I've got some research projects on the go. So there's still a lot of work to do, but it becomes more on my time since I'm not teaching.
And are you like sort of a good self-starter, or do you tend to kind of put things off?
I'm a pretty good self-starter. I think mostly because I've been burned by procrastination so many times. My problem is I need to learn to say no to things so then I can prioritize the things that I love. But I've gotten better at that over the last, I don't know, I'm going to say month.
last month. So it's a long history of good choices.
Yes, totally.
Awesome. Well, Cathryn, why don't we just I always like to know sort of the short version of you. So can you give that to me? Like what is it that you do sort of in the education world?
Sure. Well, I've been an educator since about 2005. So I guess quickly doing the math, that's about 14 years, which makes me feel old. And in that time, I've taught, I was young as grade 5, and I've taught in secondary as well. So through to grade 12, mostly history, social studies, a little bit of Latin, actually. Oh. But right now I'm a professor, a tenure track professor at the University of Alberta. So I'm teaching at the post-secondary level, mostly undergrad classes for Bachelor of Education students who want to teach social studies. Okay. But I also do some graduate courses in curriculum inquiry and weird special topics.
And weird special topics?
Yes.
Okay, and I kind of know where this is going to go, but let's just dive in. What are your weird special topics?
I have 2 courses I tend to run over the summer in alternate years. So this year is a course called Evil Education. And alternating years are with a course called Existential Education. The alliteration and all E's was completely accidental, but works pretty well.
Well, I know that a lot of educators love to have like acronyms for everything that they do. Yes. So, I expect a book forthcoming where evil is like broken down nicely into like, I don't even know what you would do. What would V stand for? Anyways, okay. So I'm not gonna lie. Like, usually I sit back and when I find someone that's interesting, I'll kind of watch their presence for a while and kind of see what they're writing about and do a little bit of research. Yeah. But okay, I saw what you were writing with this Evil Education. I was like, whoa, okay, good. I was like, literally, I saw you on Twitter. I'm like, okay. I wrote the whole like, hey, you should be on my show message like 30 seconds later. I was like, this is too fascinating just to like let it sit. So what the heck? Like what is this?
I still wrestle with that myself.
Well, that's probably a good thing.
Yeah, I think so. Basically, I would say like my jam with evil is to look at as many different conceptualizations that I can do and figure out where I think they're helpful and where they might be harmful. And then translate that into specific areas. So how can one particular instance of evil, one conceptualization, one definition, how can that help us understand teaching genocide? And what are the limits to using that as a framework for teaching, say grade 11 students about genocide?
Right.
And maybe there's a different definition that's helpful in another context, even though it's not maybe great in that one. So I really like to play a lot in my research. So, how can we, toss around some of these definitions and what are they and how are they functioning?
Right. So the basic mode of operation here is that you are trying to figure out these different kinds of evil and then use that understanding to better equip educators to talk about these challenging topics with their students.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's pretty much it. Can you write all my grant proposals?
You don't want that. I am not a self-starter, so it would come down to the wire for sure.
Okay, fair.
Yeah. So, okay. How did you wind up getting pulled into this? I mean, yeah, what was the path into like, hey, I want to study evil?
It was not intentional. I was teaching mostly grade 11 and grade 12 social studies. Mm-hmm. And in grade 11 here in Alberta, there's basically a mini unit on genocide. And I was teaching that.
A mini unit on genocide. It's like, hey guys, genocide. All right.
Yo. But every year, or in some cases every semester, I'm teaching this, and it wasn't doing what I wanted it to do. Either students were not engaged with the gravity of the situation. So, you get hands up and pens and mouths. They're like, so exactly how many million people died? They're focusing on the details, and it's not that the details aren't important, but I didn't feel they were feeling it. And so I tried hard to make them feel it, and then made the error of destroying any hope they had for the world being good. I would leave them in tears, or, I really, in my opinion, was probably like unethical teaching, because I was really providing them with these, Roger Simon calls this undirected emotions. So I've got all this stuff. So I started off applying to do a PhD because I wanted to look at teaching genocide in a better way. Because I thought, gosh, there's got to be research on this. And of course there is. There are tons of scholars who have been researching, say, how to teach genocide. And as I dove in, I discovered certain conceptualizations of evil. I thought, gosh, isn't that interesting? And also interesting in other contexts, which then switched my topic more towards the pursuit of definitions of evil rather than being specifically about teaching genocide.
Right. Okay, so the thing is, I mean, I've talked to other teachers, and I mean, I've bumped up against this myself, and I mean, there's a strong correlation between evil and teaching difficult subjects.
Yes.
And yet, I've never heard anyone come at it from this angle. Most teachers are talking, strategies for dealing with difficult subjects with your students, right? And whatever those happen to be. So, I mean, what pushed you towards looking at it from that angle, the whole idea of like just evil? Because I mean, that's heavy.
Yeah, it is heavy. To be honest, I've been trying to figure out that question, and the best I can come up with is a hodgepodge of things. One is that I'm married to a social psychologist. And so I think over many dinner table conversations, I've been programmed to think about what might lie beneath, as opposed to just the task at hand. So what are the weird and quirky things that we're not even conscious of that are forming our actions? So I think that played a role. I've always had kind of a morbid curiosity about things that are weird. So in my undergrad, way back when, I took courses on witchcraft and the occult, because I thought, gosh, isn't this interesting? People thinking these things and doing these things. And in my graduate work, I took a course on death and afterlife in Western religious tradition. And so I've have a hodgepodge of experiences with sort of the darker underbelly. So maybe all of that just informed me and set the stage.
So where do you figure that morbid curiosity comes from? Is it just something you come by naturally? I don't know. Gosh, I sound like I don't know anything. Oh my goodness, I have a PhD. Yeah, you're supposed to know everything. That's what
I know,
means.
Right? Well, I come from a family that never shied away from looking at that darker side of humanity. So on my father's side, for example, his father was in Holland during the Nazi occupation. And he was in the resistance. So this conversation about Nazis as evil and what do you do? What does an ordinary average person do when faced with these sorts of things. So that,
Right.
that would be dinner table conversation. Well, not every night or anything, to be sure. But it's, and I've always been interested in like, fantasy where there's often a lot of these darker forces, light versus dark, but also certain aspects of fiction where it was a little bit more gray. Like I really liked the Darkover series by Marion Zimmer Bradley, where, it's not so clear always who's the good guy and who's the bad guy, but you're dealing with these, fundamental human problems and humans being quite cruel to each other and to animals and to the planet.
So, okay. Wow. So what are these different conceptualizations of evil that you're dealing with?
Well, the ones that I'm focusing on right now are Arendt's banality of evil.
Okay.
Ernest Becker's fetishization of evil. Baudrillard's symbolic evil. And Elaine Badiou has 3 types of evil that he identifies in his philosophical works. And I've also very recently, so I by no means would claim any expertise, I have become quite interested in the idea of Wetiko, which comes from Cree traditions. It's called, has different spellings and other names in other societies, but that basic concept exists of this like a parasitic cannibal, in a metaphorical sense, where they are, the evil that they are doing is harming others because something inside of them is damaged. So those are the ones I'm playing with right now, mostly.
What? Playing. That's fun. Playing with evil. Yeah. Awesome.
Although evil doesn't always play fair, let me tell you.
Yeah. No. Well, that's kind of what makes it what it is.
Yeah.
So banality of evil, that's like Hitler's secretary, right? That's, that kind of thing. So not to like just put it in one sentence, okay, moving on. But I'm kind of trying to move towards the ones that are maybe less familiar. And I eventually want to bring this back around to teaching. But fetishization of evil, like I can guess at that, but can you kind of unpack that for me?
For sure. So it comes from Ernest Becker. And what he was looking at with that is how ordinary people can come to kill out of heroic joy. So he is, I think, fabulously paired with Hannah Arendt, because Hannah Arendt says, how can people unintentionally, how can they thoughtlessly partake in evil? Whereas Ernest Becker is saying, this is equally ordinary people. So we're not talking about psychopaths, but how can ordinary people delight in killing? So, for me, I think of the image with the genocide in Rwanda in the 90s, where, you see people brandishing machetes enthusiastically, and that's, someone's neighbor. And so he basically looks at how our deep psychological processes really want us to create this evil other. Evil is other and not us. And once you have that relationship established, by harming them, you are being the hero. You're achieving this immortality because you are the force of good.
So is evil then, is it a personal thing for you or social?
It's both, but in either scenario, it's a process and not a thing.
Oh. Okay, so does that mean so are you saying like evil doesn't, wow, sorry, you've got me wrestling with some really big things and I'm sorry, I'm just like this little kid coming into your big giant world that's so well constructed. I'm like, what? So evil is a process. Does that mean it requires more than one person, or can someone just be evil in and of themselves?
No, it can still be confined to a person, but it is, but it's not a definable thing. We might, let me back up a second.
Okay.
We might call something evil, and that's fine, like an evil action. But that, in my opinion, in terms of the conceptualizations that I find helpful, are that it doesn't spring out of nowhere. There's some kind of build-up.
Right.
So like in terms of psychopaths doing something terrible, one could aptly call that evil as well, but that's not the kind of evil I'm interested in. And perhaps that does spring out of nowhere, or it's, something going on with someone's, synapses or whatever. But for these ones, it's, there's a path. And why I like that framing is then that gives us an opportunity to maybe back up, see what's at the start of that path and maybe subvert it before it starts or along the way. So whether you're an ordinary person committing evil thoughtlessly or intentionally with glee, what led you to do that? That doesn't happen overnight. So what happens along the way that produces that? And then this is where the educational stuff comes in.
Right.
How can we intervene in our teaching in those processes?
Is there any aspect of helping students and maybe ourselves recognize our own culpability in that process?
Oh, that's to me the foundation and of the most importance.
So how does that look in the classroom? It's like, yes, kids, you are part of the giant machine that makes evil happen. Like,
Oh,
how do
let
you
me
work
tell
that?
you, uncomfortable. And again, this is
Yeah.
where I borrow from social psychology. You
Mhm.
really have to think about what you do before you give them that difficult knowledge. So my mentor and colleague, Kent Den Heyer, has this wonderful line about what must happen before the lesson begins. And I
Ooh.
think that that's just outstanding because, if we're going to give them this difficult knowledge that, hey, yes, you're concerned about, this environmental devastation, but, you yourself are implicated in your daily habits, in the amenities that you expect and so on and so forth. So how can you get them to sit in that yucky feeling and be like, okay,
Yeah.
I'm not guilty because I didn't create these things, but I'm responsible. And so you want to get them feeling just bad enough, not so bad that they're crippled, but not feeling like they have no impact on that whatsoever, because we want to move them to action.
So how do you do that? I mean, because it is like you say, if you're suddenly coming, aware that you are part of this, machine that is in some way responsible for the ills of the world. I mean, how do you help a student sit with that without getting crushed by that weight?
Yeah. Well, one is that I think they need a language to express that. And so, really open conversations in your classrooms that, this is difficult knowledge. These are things that are going to make you feel in all these different ways. And maybe we can talk about the different feelings you might experience. And then students are better equipped to figure out how they might manage that. Because we all have our ways of managing things like fear and anxiety and stress.
Right.
So I think that's like a step one, which, I mean, honestly, I think is great for any classroom anyway. We should talk about our feelings more in school. But further to that, I think we need to find, again, a lot of this is a strange dance. In this case, between like the fixed and the open. So, we could give them, some practical tools in their toolkit, take shorter showers if you're concerned about the environment, write letters to your government officials, about more sustainable farming practices and so on and so forth.
Right.
So you can do all these sorts of things, but I think you also have to leave it open that it's not, it's not that you check these boxes. Because again, going back to our rent, we don't want this to become thoughtless. Well, I do these things and then I'm a good person. I don't have to think about it.
Right.
So we want to, again, give them, I hesitate to use the word resilience, but for lack of a better term, I will. Give them some resilience to just to keep that process going and to be okay with being imperfect. Because sometimes we do that as well. Like, oh, well, you drive to work every day like I do. So you can't be an environmentalist. So if you're not perfect, just don't try. We don't want that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I just immediately think of just, people given David Suzuki was in big trouble in the media a couple of years back just for, flying everywhere.
Yeah.
And I don't know, not taking a camel or something. I don't know what the expectations were.
Yes. That politics of perfection I find to be quite unhelpful.
Yeah. Yes. Yes, absolutely. I like what you said too about the language to actually express what they're dealing with. I mean, that's, even as a new parent, that's one of the best things I learned. Just, I've got a couple, under fives in my house, and just being able to teach your kids that, when you're mad, you say, I am mad, or whatever.
Yes.
When you're, giving them the language, because, it's the vehicle for thought, right? So,
yeah.
So what have you discovered? I mean, you're researching this, you're digging into this, and coming at it from a place of like, I don't know, hence research. So what have you discovered? This episode of Ed is brought to you by ATB, and they've partnered with the Boyle Street Community Services to create Four Directions Financial, a place where people living in poverty or on the street have a safe, secure place to do basic banking. Since identification is often a challenge for the homeless, they allow clients to be identified through a fingerprint or eye scan. Four Directions doesn't just bring banking to this community, it brings dignity, respect, and a sense of hope to its people. If you want to see the rest of the Four Directions story, visit atb.com/Brian. That's Bryan. All right, let's get back to my conversation with Cathryn.
I have discovered that when people are reading about things that make them uncomfortable, they don't want to hear it.
Okay.
So I've had a lot of success in my own classrooms, like with my, people studying to be teachers and with my graduate classes, because I have such a control over that environment. We get to know each other first, and then we settle the stage, and I can have this sort of procedure to get them okay with discomfort. But when I write a paper and I can't front load it, I find that's very hard. So I've realized, and that's given me, I think, a lot of humility in terms of how can I respect other people's feelings who I don't yet know, and I'm still really figuring that out. Because I realized it's not just me and my odd fascinations and me and my students, but there's a greater world out there that is receiving this work, and I need to find ways to care for their emotional and cognitive processes as well.
So is your research more couched in sort of psychology then, or what's sort of the approach?
It's it's really interdisciplinary. So there's certainly a big thrust from social psychology in there. So I work a lot with terror management theory that's based on the work of Ernest Becker.
Okay.
But I'm interested in other theories as well. But there's also a heavy philosophical component as well. So particularly with folks like Elaine Badiou and Hannah Arendt, although I guess she called herself a political theorist, not a philosopher. But anyway,
perhaps she can call herself whatever she wants. You're the one who's like reading it. So.
Yeah, that's true. Good point. Yeah. So I find it's definitely interdisciplinary, which is a blessing and a curse. I fully believe what Ernest Becker said about big problems needing big solutions, and no one thinker and no one discipline can really provide that. But at the same time, of course, I don't want to spread myself so thin intellectually that I then do a disservice.
Right.
I don't want a Kantian scholar or an Arendtian scholar to be like, oh, that Cathryn, man, whew, she really got it wrong. So it's a project that comes with crippling imposter syndrome. But I think it leads to richer findings, because I'm not relying on one specific area or one specific thinker to sort of look at something as big as evil.
Yeah. No, I want to go back actually for a sec too, because you talked about how people don't want to hear bad things.
Yeah.
So how does that? I mean, I've got a lot of students who are absolutely fascinated. I wouldn't say in an unhealthy way, but nonetheless fascinated by bad things.
Yeah, good point.
So how do those two come together? And I mean, honestly, myself, it's like I'm far less likely to click on an article about the royal baby's new name than I am about a school shooting or something like that. That's what I will go towards. So
yes,
how does that mesh?
Well, probably I should have qualified my statement. They don't want to hear things that implicate themselves in that badness. So yeah, I think we have, and I guess Freud would answer that in a particular way, probably something about the death drive, but we would have their theories, but I think a lot of us have a bit of a morbid fascination with some of these things, which is why we have that phrase, if it bleeds, it leads.
Yeah.
But when we ourselves are implicated as part of it, even if it's just, being complicit, I think that's very hard. And especially the terror management theory and Becker work that I engage with talks to you about how this is coming from your underlying fears of your own mortality. And so we're saying people act in weird and quirky ways because they're trying to deny that they're, creatures who are, going to die. And, we have theories about, where we go after and what happens with that and all, but it's still a terrifying event that kind of turns us into jerks, to just call it how it is, I guess.
Yeah.
But then by expressing that to them and getting them to think about their mortality, they then have all those defensive reactions that I'm warning them about.
Right.
Yeah.
And so some of the defense against this sounds to me like, sort of social activity, not social activity, social activism, right? Doing your best to kind of reduce your impact, on the processes that produce these bad things. But I mean, let's bring it back around sort of the ground floor here. Like, you're working with student teachers.
Yeah.
So what is it you're telling them to do when they're going into the classroom? Or what are you trying to equip them with as they go into the classroom?
Yeah. Well, I because I focus on social studies instruction, we talk a lot about bringing in multiple perspectives in a respectful way. Because that's I would say one of the biggest challenges in social studies, because you have such diverse history that you're engaging with, but also this pushed to have voices in that have been neglected. So we focus a lot here on Indigenous and Francophone perspectives, but also, important are, Black settlers in Alberta, and so on. So there's lots of these voices that tap into these big issues of racism and xenophobia and all these things. So a lot of new teachers are really afraid of talking about it because they're worried there's going to be a fight in their classroom, literally or figuratively. So what I want to do is, give them some provocations for thinking of what they have to do before they have those conversations, as well as how to manage it during and after, and maybe, how to talk to administrators and parents as well. Because if we want to engage, like take Indigenous perspectives, for example, if we really want to engage meaningfully, so not my colleague Dwayne Donald has these really great lines about avoiding incorporating and infusing, because if you're infusing perspective in, you've got something potent that's been made weak as it diffuses in the water, and incorporating, of course, you're like eating, which my addition to that, I don't know how Dwayne feels about that, is to say, well, eventually you then poop it out, so that's no good either. So if we want to engage with rather than incorporating or infusing, then we actually have to be okay that these are coming from really radically different worldviews, different ways of how the world came to be, different ways of being human, and all of those things, again, according to terror management theory, can put you into this state of threat. So if you're going to do something meaningful, it might put them in a state of threat. So what do you have to do before, during, and after? Right.
Because engaging, I like the distinction you're making, like incorporating. Yeah, it feels like you're just kind of tacking it on, right? It's just like, but engaging is, that's where things start getting scary again. That's when people don't want to hear the bad stuff. And it's funny because I've been there too, just like, trying to, like, I was reading a story to my 5-year-old, and it was this little kid's book about how, the Europeans came over and settled North America. I had to stop reading it, didn't know how to explain it to my daughter, but I was like, I can't, this is just because it's horrible. My little daughter. Oh, wow. Oh, so is teaching then, does something like this politicize teaching?
I actually think that it depoliticizes teaching.
Okay, in what way?
Because I think if we can realize that emotional component and manage it, then I think we can actually dialogue across difference. So I'll teach a number of students who come from, what we'd consider more of a conservative background, as well as ones that come, from more of a left-wing background. Mm-hmm. And if you set that stage, then they can talk with each other and realize that, maybe there's some fundamental differences, but they're both coming from a place of care, and they can shift that discussion to what's going to be helpful rather than what's going to be counterproductive. And then I think we actually have a chance of not enforcing one way of thinking or being in the classroom. We can all be there, but we just have this common understanding of what it means to be respectful with each other.
So even by understanding like the process of evil, that actually, it's a part of, sorry, I'm wrestling with this right now, which just makes for terrible podcasting. But by understanding sort of the machinations of how we sort of play our part in the story of evil, it can come back around and help us to understand each other better and maybe leave us in a better place.
I think so. I really love what the poet Thomas Hardy said about, it goes something like, if a way to the better there be, it exacts in taking a good look at the worst. And I think that line is really apt, because if we neglect to think about where we've gone wrong, how can we possibly do better? So I actually see the study of evil as really hopeful. And a lot of people are quite confused when they meet me, because I tend to have a big smile on my face, and I'm a generally very happy person. And they ask me what I study, and I was like, oh, I study evil. And they're like, huh.
That's like dropping a bomb in every conversation, right?
It's always, so I always say with a bit of trepidation, because the reactions are polar opposites. There's always the reaction of, oh, wow, that's interesting, tell me more. Or they'll be like, oh, and then they'll walk away, and that's fine too.
That's probably a nice little filter you have. It's like, I probably didn't want to talk to you anyway, so There you go.
That's right. Well, it saves my time. It's very efficient.
I think I'm just going to steal that line now. I'll just say, I study evil. Just see what happens.
Do it.
Well, there's a certain kind of tongue-in-cheek element, I think, to your work. I mean, your Twitter handle is Dr. Evil Academic.
Yes.
Is that something that you feel like you need to do just because you are dealing with this kind of stuff?
Oh, yes. And again, borrowing from social psych, humor is such a great diffuser for all these uncomfortable emotions. So I think if you can have a little bit of a laugh, and maybe tap into the funnier aspects, then it just sort of makes everyone feel more comfortable.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a cancer survivor, and
wow.
so the kind of speaking of dropping bombs in conversations, I don't try to do that very often, but the humor is just it has to be in the darkest of places. It has to, because otherwise, oh goodness, all that's left to do is cry.
Yes,
and nobody wants to do that. Right on. Well, Cathryn, thank you so much for giving me just a little taste of your what you do. This is like, wow, a lot to chew on.
Well, thank you.
Actually, before we go then, is there anywhere that people can get a hold of you if they want to know more about your evil pursuits of evil? I don't know how to put that. Yeah,
that's right. How, if you want to get on board with more evil, how do
you do it?
Well, anyone is welcome at any point to drop me an email. I've got my university email is usually pretty easy to find on the internet machine. Or of course, Twitter, Instagram, all those, newfangled web 2.0, 3.0. I'm not sure. I'm not up with the technology.
I lost the numbers a while back.
But I welcome anyone touching base with me anytime. And I'm happy to talk to anyone about it. And I've tried. Oh, actually, what I should say. Gosh, I'm terrible at self-advertisement. I have a website that I have developed as part of a research project. It's called The Grim Educator.
The Grim Educator. I like that.
Yeah, and it has descriptions of. It's mostly right now focusing on Becker with a little bit of Arendt, and it's got lesson plans and lesson ideas, there's little descriptions, links to videos that I think are helpful. It's pretty larval right now, but there's some good things up there. Thanks to my wonderful team of graduate research assistants, and some of my research participants have contributed to the website as well. But over in the coming years, I'm going to be adding more and more to it. I'm really excited. So they should go to the Grim Educator and look me up and drop me a line.
Yeah, I just did. I just looked it up. I think I'm seeing a Grim Reaper with an apple in his hand.
Yes.
Or her hand, its hand.
My husband's doctoral student, Andy Scott, drew that, for which I'm very grateful.
It's neat.
It's cute, eh?
Yeah, I love it. That's awesome.
I may get a tattoo with something like that at some point.
We'll see. That's brilliant. I love it. All right. Well, Cathryn, again, thank you so much. This has been great.
Oh, thank you. It's just been a delight chatting with you.
All right. You take care then.
You too. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye-bye. This week's episode of Ed is also brought to you by the Alberta Podcast Network. It's a network of Alberta-made podcasts about every topic imaginable, including the Assumptions podcast. It's a podcast hosted by Daniel and Kyle, one a Christian and the other an atheist. Each episode, they have a productive discussion about their views on everything from stories and gender roles to sex and religion. You can find it at AssumptionsPod.com, or you can find it along with all the other Alberta Podcast Network shows at AlbertaPodcastNetwork.com. And if you want to get in touch or you'd like to be a guest on this show, you can email me at theedpodcast@gmail.com or hit me up on Twitter at theedpodcast. If you want to listen to more of Ed, you can head over to the website, theedpodcast.podbean.com, or find me on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or the podcatcher of your choice. Just search up Ed Conversations. Ed can also be heard on Voice Ed Radio. It's 24-hour internet broadcasting devoted to the best ideas in education. Just head over to voiced.ca. So, on behalf of myself and Cathryn, thank you so much for listening, and we'll catch you next time. Bye.